Alright, here goes. So, my first episode of Little Life, Big Loss. And I I cannot believe I'm recording this podcast. I've got another podcast channel, The Evolved Lifestyle. And on those podcasts, I've shared lots of my story in the past. I've shared my trying to conceive journey. I've shared about my endometriosis, being diagnosed with endometriosis. And now I've started this new podcast, so it is called Little Life Big Loss because we just sadly lost our daughter. So I just thought I'll start a whole new channel purely as a space for lost parents to share their story of their babies. And I guess so I just thought, the first episode needs to be my story and why I would start such a podcast. And so the podcast is going to be predominantly, I would say, me interviewing parents who have been through the journey of losing a child. And so I think it's only valid that the first episode be me sharing my journey, and I'm not going to do it in an interview style. I just wanted to share what's happened for us, sharing my story about our little Millie. I've shared a lot of it on social media already, but I guess I haven't shared from beginning to end. And I know that so far, I'm meeting up with people to have coffees with friends who have lost babies, and I'm just so intrigued. I'm tell me everything. So for us, my husband and I, Dylan, we started trying for a baby in November 2019, and we actually fell pregnant straight away the second month of trying. We got that positive pregnancy test and was so excited, and I say now that I probably didn't appreciate it as much as I should have. I did, we were so excited, but when we lost the baby only 6 weeks later, I was like, whoa, a miscarriage, okay. And then very quickly learned how common miscarriage is. And then never in my wildest dreams did I think it would then take us 2 years to fall pregnant again. So we went on a trying to conceive journey. We actually even broke up for 6 months, not long after that, due to a lot of other things that were happening in our life that I didn't realize were impacting us so much. So I see the blessing there in what had happened. We had a lot of growing to do as individuals. Both Dylan and myself, we weren't married at that stage. And so we broke up for 6 months, and I so badly wanted to be a mum. I actually inquired and started the journey of IVF, and I initially went in to freeze my eggs, and I went down that path. I was like, I'll freeze my eggs. I don't know what's happening with Dylan and myself, but I just knew I wanted to be a mum. So when I went in and I had all my tests done, they were like, actually your eggs aren't good enough to freeze. So if you were to freeze your eggs and then thaw them out, the chances of you having a baby would be about 5 to 8% chance of a healthy pregnancy from your frozen eggs. And I was like, wow, okay, wasn't expecting that. And so they said the best chance of you having a child right now would be to fertilize the egg straight away, which would be with sperm. And as I was single and wasn't in a relationship, I was like, it would be donor sperm. So yeah, I went through that journey, and I got about 3 months into kind of what that process would look like. So having counselling, am I in a position to be a mum? It's called Single Mum by Choice, and there's a really big community in it. And I got to the top of the donor wait list, and I just remember them saying, because I was so excited to get to that point, and I remember them saying, don't be too excited, it's really not, It was very much an anticlimax. I got to the top of the list and I started going through these donors, and I was like, I'm going to be sharing my DNA with a stranger, which was so fine, but I couldn't find one that I was like, I just was like, this is not what I wanted. And I remember my sister saying to me so clearly, she said, you can't choose a sperm donor because you already know who you want to be sharing a baby with. And that was Dylan. And that was the turning point for me to, rekindle things with him. And I'm so glad I did. We have been on an incredible journey. We got married in March 2023, just this year. And we were actually 22 weeks pregnant at our wedding. We had a gender reveal. It was beautiful. But let's go back a little bit. I was So we got back together in the October 2020, and just started to try to conceive straight away again, because obviously we'd already started prior. We knew we wanted to have babies together. We knew we wanted to be together. And that journey just seemed a little bit harder than what we had anticipated. So kept trying to fall pregnant. Each month it wasn't happening. If you're over the age of 35, they say to just try for 6 months, and if it's not working, you go get checked out. If you're under 35, they say keep trying for 12 months and then go get checked out. So we moved to the Gold Coast in the March of 2022, and at that point we'd been trying to fall pregnant for over a year now. And so I just went to the GP and I was like, hey, look, you know, we've been trying to fall pregnant for some time now. I had already made an appointment to see Dr. Ong, who was an IVF specialist, but I needed a referral. So I went to this GP, I said, hey, I need a referral to see him. And she said, that's great, I'm all well and good, I'm happy to give you the referral. However, let's do this, this and this first to see why is it that you're not falling pregnant. And so she sent me for something that was called a hycosi. A hycosi is where you go in and they flush your tubes out. Essentially, you're more fertile. You should fall pregnant after this. But when I went in for the hycosi and they went to flush my tubes out, they couldn't. And the sonographer asked me if I'd ever heard of endometriosis or if I'd ever spoken to a doctor about endometriosis. No. And so the sonographer calls a doctor in, and the doctor comes in and she says, I can't move your bowel and I can't flush your tube. She said the only way this could be possible is if you have stage 4 endometriosis, which is deep infiltrated endometriosis. And normally they can't diagnose you in one of these appointments, but mine was so bad that they were able to basically tell me that it's very, very likely, or probably the only thing that could be wrong, right? So luckily I already had my appointment with Dr. Ong, and when I went in with him, he had all of the tests, he had all of the scans and things there, and he booked me in for a laparoscopic surgery and I think it's called histoscopy, which is basically the removal of endometriosis. So if I hadn't have had the hycosi, they would have just gone in with the lap and they would have found something, taken it out, biopsied it, and then diagnosed the endo. But at this point, it was pretty well known that I had that. So I went in for my surgery July last year, July 2022, and Dr. Keong from Southport, he's an incredible surgeon, and he removed all of my endometriosis. The recovery of that surgery was awful. They say to give yourself 5 to 10 days. I had the full 10 days and it was extremely painful. However, all of a sudden you just kind of come better. My next 3 periods were pretty awful. We continued to try to fall pregnant, and we were told by Dr. Ong after the surgery, if you can't fall pregnant by month 3, come back and we're going to start IVF. So we started that process of talking to them. We had the plan. We had what medications I was going to take, what injections I would need. And then the month that we were going to start the IVF, it's quite a process. It's injections, scans, blood tests, etc. And we had 3 weddings on. So this was October, November of 2022. And I was just like trying to make it work. I was like, how can I start this IVF process and attend these weddings? And in the end, it was just like, this is going to be too hard. And look, I don't want to miss my family's or friends' weddings. So let's just go to the weddings and we'll start IVF next month. So I called them up and I cancelled the IVF. And I remember the lady at the chemist saying, well, do you want to come pick up all of your prescriptions? We've got all the meds sitting here waiting for you. Pop them in the fridge for next month. And I was like, look, let's just leave them with you for now. And we'll start next month. Obviously, within that month, we were still trying to fall pregnant naturally. So we attended the 3 weddings, and Dylan actually went away for work for a week down in Canberra, and he was going to earn quite a lot of money that month or that week with this job, and that was going to pay for the IVF. And on the Monday, the 14th of November, I woke up and I just like felt really ill. I actually thought I had COVID. I was like, and I didn't have a COVID test, so I just did a pregnancy test, and lo and behold, I was pregnant. So naturally conceived pregnancy, couldn't believe it. I literally peed on about 10 pregnancy tests because I was like, is this real? I hadn't had a positive pregnancy test for 17 months. That was heart-wrenching. Like back-to-back negative pregnancy tests is just awful. And so I rang Dr. Ong's office the next day and I was like, I think I'm pregnant. Like, I'm supposed to be starting IVF on Thursday, but I think I'm pregnant. They were like, come in, have a blood test. I was scared to call Dylan for 2 days because I was like, I don't want to call and tell him that I'm pregnant, like if I'm not, or if it's not real, and it took me to about 8 weeks before I even believed that I was pregnant. So I go in and I have the blood tests, and yeah, they call me and I'm pregnant. So it was a really magical journey. I like that 9 months of pregnancy. I still had anxiety, but I just had to really tell myself, like, one, I deserve this pregnancy, and I just had to keep saying, like, I trust my body and I trust my baby. I was extremely sick. I had a very, very tough pregnancy. I had groin pain, my gums would bleed, my nose would bleed. I was vomiting every single day. I never got diagnosed with hyperemesis, because hyperemesis is when you go into hospital because you're so sick. And that didn't happen for me, but I would vomit every single day. Sometimes I'd have like 3 days of none, and I'd be like, this is it. It was so funny because people would be like, it's gonna end, I promise you, either, after the first trimester, or, it just didn't. So we had our beautiful wedding in the March. We had a white wedding, and we had our gender reveals. There was just this pink confetti everywhere. I love pink, and I really thought I was always going to have boys, actually. I always thought I'd have sons, but the day I tested positive, I was like, it's a girl. I just had this innate feeling that it was a girl. And then once the wedding was done, we were able to plan for the baby and get the nursery ready. So that was like week 26, week 27, week 28, come week 30, everything was still great. I had a couple of times where I had what they call a reduced movement, where, you maybe don't feel baby moving much, but throughout my whole pregnancy, I didn't feel her move much. And I was told a lot of the times it was because I had an anterior placenta, so my placenta was at the front, and it was my first pregnancy, so I didn't know what I was supposed to be feeling. I would quite often feel something in there, but it was never like the kicks and the punches that people feel about, or I would feel like the little bubbles. I would feel like butterflies, they call it, but I would say it was like bubbles. So 3 different times I think I went into hospital with reduced movements, and they would put like a belt on me and they would track her heart rate. They were always like, she has a great heart rate. It was always above 150, which is quite common for a girl. Boy is normally around like lower than 150. Always had great heartbeat. There was really nothing wrong with the pregnancy. And so we booked it. However, she was breech, so her little head was up here, up under my ribs. Sometimes I struggle to catch my breath quite often. Her head was up, and there's things you can do for a breech pregnancy. They can suggest that you turn the baby, or you try to do different movements. I did a little bit of it, but there's a lot of myths around it. My OB was like, if she's breech, she's breech. And to move it, I forget what it's called, but for them to move the baby externally, like they basically, like, it's really painful for mom to move the baby. So I was like, you know what? If she hasn't moved, if she hasn't turned, it's because there's a reason. She knows the inside of me better than I do, and she knows why she hasn't moved. So they don't generally allow vaginal births with a breech baby in Australia. My GP is actually Argentinian, so she said, if we're in Argentina, I would let you do it and I would help you. And so there was at one point, I think I must have been at about 35 weeks pregnant, and she was guiding me on what to do if I went into labour and baby was breech, because there's things you can do to have it be a somewhat safe labour if that was to happen, if I was going to go into spontaneous labour. Thankfully that didn't happen, and as the weeks went on, I went in for more scans. We went through private hospital. We were at Pindara on the Gold Coast. Absolutely phenomenal team. We have an obstetrician, Drew Moffrey, he's divine. And at some stage, maybe I must have been about 37 weeks pregnant, Millie actually moved to transverse. At first she was oblique lie, so she was like kind of diagonal. And then about 10 days before, we booked in for a planned cesarean for breech, and again, you know, if she had have moved, we might have changed it back to a vaginal birth. However, you know, I think by this stage I'd kind of come to terms with cesarean. We planned for it. I knew it was coming up. And so, so she was transverse, she was sideways. And when I went in for my last scan, her feet were actually down. And so Drew said, that's fine, when we go in, what we're going to do, we're going to cut you for the cesarean. I'm going to grab her feet, and we're going to pull her out. And so I was super excited. I was very prepared. I'd done a lot of research. I'd looked into cesareans. I'd looked into breech babies. I was never scared of the cesarean. I think because of my endo surgery and how awful that was. I'd spoken to a lot of other women who'd had Caesars and who'd had cesareans, and they were like, endo surgery was way worse than a Caesar. So I was like, sweet, I'm good. I'm prepared for this. We booked in the Caesar for Friday the 14th of July, and funnily enough, someone said to me, oh, that's Bastille Day. And I had actually been to Paris 10 years prior on Bastille Day. It was a really big day for me. I saw the fireworks over the Eiffel Tower. It was a really big moment for me. So I was like, you know what, that's a sign. I'd been, like, Paris, the word kept coming up for me. I actually thought I was going to name her Paris at one point. So I was like, okay, Bastille Day, we're booked in, we're having a cesarean, this is what's going on. So I still remember getting wheeled into the theatre to have my Caesar, and I looked up at Drew, my obstetrician, and I was like, we made it, we did it. I'm going to get emotional. Because I was like, I did it, you know, I got to a full-term pregnancy, and I'm about to have my baby, and we did it, and we got there. So you can make a playlist before you go in for any labor or cesarean, and I had my playlist there, and it was called Birth of Bubba, and I had lots of Christian music in there. I love Christian worship music, and had my playlist, and I remember making the playlist during the week, and I remember thinking, I wonder what songs will be on, you know, during the birth and like later. And there's a song called Same God, and it was playing, and just as Drew went to cut me open, so it was a maternal assisted C-section as well, so I was in the drapes. The plan was to, as she's coming out, the mum grabs baby and puts her on your chest, because you know, it's just a really beautiful way for the mum to be involved in the cesarean and be able to have that skin to skin when they're first born. So just as Drew's about to cut me, he actually grabbed my hands, he touches, he says, not many people are able to feel their uterus, or say they have. So, you know, being in a maternal assisted, you're in there, you're in amongst it. And anyway, Drew looks up to the obstetrician and he says, breech, like as in like just a warning, this is a breech birth we're about to do. Should have still been super smooth, you know, breech isn't super common, but it's not uncommon. So he cuts me open, goes to go in, and feels for Millie, and her legs weren't where he thought they were. She had moved, she turned up, so her little legs were up under my ribs, and all he could feel was her back. Again, I've since learned that's not super uncommon. It's not a great position for them to be in, but it's basically spine to him. And he goes to feel in, and he couldn't grab her legs, he couldn't grab hold of her head. He felt an arm, and he went to pull it out, but it would have hurt her, so he put that back in. And then he called out to the anaesthetist, and he said GNT spray, which is a spray that they can use as almost like an intervention to help my uterus relax, to try to get her out. He couldn't get her out. And at this point, I could see, this was just before he asked for the GNT spray, actually. I started screaming, and I started saying, like, why can't you get her? Like, I was like, Drew, what are you doing? Why can't you get her? And I remember it was either Dylan or one of the doctors saying, what's wrong? Like, why? Like, what's wrong? You're okay. And I was like, I can see it on his face, and I could see on the obstetrician's face that there was something wrong. And he couldn't get her out. So we've since had a debrief with Drew, and he said he basically felt up her spine, he felt her head, he could feel where she was, but he couldn't get her out. So he calls for the GNT spray, I think that's what it's called. Spray it under my tongue, and the anaesthetist says to me, this is going to make you sick, or it might give you a headache, but I've got to do this. So under my tongue, spray. Didn't work. Under the tongue, did it again. And at that point, I didn't know at the time, but I found out later, they had to cut my uterus in a T-incision to get her out. And the next minute he pulls her out by the legs, then her bum, and then her head. And We later on worked out it was actually 11:11 that this was all happening, and I'm like screaming, and I'm like just yelling, is she breathing, is she alive? And they pull her out, and she was floppy. She had no muscle tone, and Drew recalls now that it was actually the shape of her head that alerted him that there was something wrong, and he put her on my chest for all of about 2 seconds, and then he put her straight onto the resus table for the paediatrician to work on Millie. And at this point, Dylan so beautifully, and he hadn't done any research about cesareans. He didn't know what to expect. So he's like, she's here, babe, she's here. Did you see her hair? She's okay. And I was like, I knew that she wasn't breathing. I knew that she wasn't crying, and she hadn't opened her eyes. And I just knew something was wrong. And obviously they put her straight on the resus table. We didn't get our skin to skin. She hadn't cried. And I just remember laying there, and they're stitching me up, and I look over, and I can just see the paediatrician's back, and I could see the nurses and the midwives looking up at him and looking down at Millie, and I could just see in their face they were thinking, what is wrong? They called out that she had a heartbeat and she was breathing. Hallelujah. I was like, thank God. Like, that's all, I just wanted that. I wanted her to be breathing, and I wanted her heart to be beating. And so the doctors continued to stitch me up. I'm like numb from the chest down because I'd had the spinal. And then at this point they came over and they said, we're going to take Millie to NICU, and Dylan's going to come with us. So they took my husband up with Millie, and they took her up to NICU. They continued to stitch me up, and I remember laying there. I was so sick. I was shaking. I was vomiting. Was it from shock? Was it from trauma? Was it from the GNT spray? I'm not sure, but I was very unwell. I was just so sick. And the beautiful, beautiful staff, the doctor was wiping my mouth. The doctor happened to be Dylan's cousin's best friend. So of course, she was just so divine. My anaesthetist was gorgeous. Like, we had such a beautiful team, and they stitched me up. And I just remember at the time thinking that felt like they were wrestling a crocodile inside of me. Like, it was just such an awful, awful experience. I can't compare it to any other Caesar. I don't know if that's what it normally feels like, or whether it was, Drew unable to get her out. So they take me to recovery. They take Dylan to NICU. At that point, that's when they said, what's her name? And Dylan said it was Millie, which was a name that we'd been toying with for quite a while. So Millie, Rose, Remidy, Evrard. Millie meaning gentle strength. Rose is the epitome of beauty. Remedy means cure. Remedy, cure. And then Evrard means brave bear. So little did we know when we named her. We'd decided on that name the week before, and we just had no idea how perfect that name would be for her. So they take me into recovery. I was so sick. I was shaking, and I know that shaking after a Caesar is very common. You just uncontrollably. It's an awful feeling. And I'm sure there was a lot of that was shock as well. So they take me into recovery, and I had lots of doctors and nurses coming down to see me, and I remember Drew came down to me, my obstetrician, and he said, Rochelle, I'm so sorry. He said that wasn't the way that it was planned, and that's not what you wanted. And I was like, is she okay? And he said, she is. She's okay. She's very unwell though. And he said, I'm really sorry. One of her legs broke as I was pulling her out. He said, I felt it pop. And it was really strange because the week leading up to the birth, I kept having hip dysplasia come into my mind. Like, it was just a word that kept coming in, or a thought, or but that's quite common in breech babies. So I just thought, yeah, that's why I was kind of envisioning that. So he said she has a broken leg, and I'm like, okay, that's okay. We can deal with a broken leg. She's breathing. She's got a heart rate. I can deal with that. And he said, whilst I was in doing your surgery, I couldn't get Millie out, and so I had to cut a T incision. And at this point, he's explaining it to me, and I'm like, that's fine. I don't care. And he said, it doesn't affect your fertility, but you'll never have a vaginal birth again. That's fine. At this point, I'm thinking I could never even go through pregnancy or birth again. It's okay. I've got Millie. She's got a broken leg. I've got a T incision. I thought he meant externally, so I thought I was going to have this big T scar on my stomach. Again, I didn't care. So I'm still in recovery. More doctors are coming down, and then they came down, they saw me again, and they said, we're going to take you up to NICU. Millie's up there. We want to take you up there, but we just have to let you know she doesn't just have one broken leg. She has 2 broken legs and 2 broken arms. And I was like, okay, that's fine. Have no fucking clue how that's just happened, but okay, we can, you know, she's still breathing, she still has a heartbeat. And so they take me up to NICU, and I got to touch her little head, and I got to touch her little hand, and she was all bandaged up, and she had something holding her jaw up, like a thing around her head. And at this point, they weren't sure if she'd had a lack of oxygen to the brain at birth. So HIE, I think it's called. And so they said, look, we either need to get her into a special care unit in the Gold Coast Hospital or Brisbane. And there was no beds in Gold Coast, so they said, we're going to have to take her to Brisbane. And I was like, that's fine. So they wanted to get her onto a cooling mat. It's a thing they put her on for 72 hours, and it cools the baby's body. And if there was any damage to her brain in that birthing process or soon after, it can basically stop the damage continuing, the cells can like regenerate. And so we were like, yep, let's do that. So they got someone called Neo Rescue to come down from Brisbane, a team. And I remember that doctor being quite rude to us. It was probably like our first bad, and to be fair, our only negative experience we had was this doctor. She was like, I know that everyone's saying that this baby looks better than it did a few hours ago, but all I can see is a really sick baby. And we were like, okay, yep, no problem. And so I feel like now, like it was almost like she was like, why? It was almost like she didn't have hope for our baby. It was really awful. And so they wrapped Millie up and they put her into the crib to take her to Brisbane. And at that point, they had taken me to another room. Dylan was still with her, because all I kept saying to him, even before we went into hospital, I said, you never leave her side. If they have to take her somewhere, you never leave her side. And that wasn't because I thought she was going to be sick. It was because I'd heard of, like, you know, cases where they mix the babies up by accident or whatever. So I was like, you stay with her always. So I'm in another room. They take Millie to Brisbane, and at that point they were wheeling her out. She opened her eyes and just looked at Dylan and closed her eyes again. And never did he realise that that was going to be such a beautiful, significant moment, and that she actually wasn't going to open her eyes again. He was not going to see her eyes. So they transferred her to Brisbane to the critical care unit, and they transferred me in a separate ambulance, and Dylan drove up in his car. And so we get up to the hospital. This was the Friday the 14th. This is still the Friday night. And so they got her onto this cooling mat. They had to get her on there within 6 hours of birth. When we look at the timing, did they get her on there exactly 6 hours? I'm not sure. Is that super critical? Not sure. So the next 72 hours was like super critical. It was like we were told 3 things. If she has there's stage 1, 2, and 3 of if she had this HIE, the potential brain damage. Stage 1 is there might not have been any damage, and that means that she's fine, but she probably wouldn't have needed to be on the cooling mat. Stage 2 is 70% of babies come out okay, maybe just with like future physical needs. Stage 30% come out where they need a lot of physical help, but they're still good. Stage 3, 50% will have cerebral palsy, and 50% won't make it. So for that first 3 days, or that first 72 hours, we literally didn't know if Millie was stage 2 or stage 3, and that there was, you know, a 50% chance that she would die or be cerebral palsy, 30% have a lot of issues, or 70% okay. So that was a lot of information to take in. Knowing that she had her 2 broken arms and 2 broken legs, it was like, okay, what are we working with here? And, you know, we didn't know if to tell family, we didn't know, you know, so I think at that point Dylan, you know, did a post saying that, you know, Millie has 2 broken arms and 2 broken legs, but we will be home, because at that point we really thought we were going to be home, but we just still thought we had this baby that would just have some broken limbs and that she'd just be doing a lot of physiotherapy. So 72 hours later, they go to take Millie off the cooling mat to take her over for the MRI. She has the MRI, and the next day we find out there's actually no brain damage. Like her MRI came back great. And we were like, phenomenal, amazing. Like that was such a huge relief for me. I was like, she's not going to die. Like I said, I remember saying to the doctor, like, so all these tubes, she's like, tubes everywhere and like all this stuff going on. I said, are you keeping her alive? And the neonatologist said, no, like, she can breathe on her own. We're just assisting her. Like, it was like, oh, amazing. Like, oh my gosh, this is just going to be a really long journey for us, but our baby's, she's okay. Like, she's not on life support right now. But then when the MRI came back and it was okay, it was like, well, if it's not brain damage, then what is it? Because why does she have 2 broken arms and 2 broken legs and she hasn't opened her eyes? She is breathing with assistance, but she could breathe on her own. Her heart is great. What is going on? And so then they did an EEG, and that they had this thing on her where like it would monitor for seizures. She wasn't having seizures. Her EEG was actually fine. She almost was better than she was before. So we had so much hope. We were just like praying for these miracles. I was praying for her eyes to open. I just like wanted to see my baby's eyes. And then, so that would have been the Tuesday night. Monday night, that was the Tuesday. The EEG was fine. They were taking like blood tests. They couldn't put like catheters in because she just would bleed out. So she had really poor bleeding. She had a bleed on the skull, but not on the brain. They were like asking us all these questions, like, could it be this? Do you have anything in your genetics where people break bones a lot? Like, well, my brother breaks, like, a lot of his bones are always broken, but, you know, it was always when he played sports. Or was that something? My brother had a very similar birth, but, you know, it ended up not being that. So it was like all these things that we just couldn't pinpoint. And, you know, we were just like leaning on hope. We were just praying that she would open her eyes and she'd just be better. And like, I look back at photos and videos now and I think, gosh, I was naive. Like, she was a very sick baby. She like never moved her hand. Like, but she reacted to us. Like, if she heard Dylan's voice, she would smile. Or if we tickled her, she would smile. Like, or if you put your finger near her hand, she would clutch on. Or if we touched her feet, her little toes would move. So, you know, I shouldn't say we were naive because we were just so fucking hopeful. And then on the Wednesday was kind of like the most amount of hope I think we had. We were just getting lots of, you know, the EEG was good, the MRI was good, like, okay, so what is it? And on the Wednesday afternoon, so this would have been, so she was born Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, it was day 6, and we keep saying we had 6 days with her, but we really had 7 when we count the day that she was born, and then the last day we had with her. But on the Wednesday morning, we were like, yeah, like, just things were looking up, and although she didn't look well, I just felt like death wasn't the answer. I just thought we were going to take our girl home, like, even if it was in a wheelchair or, you know, with lots of help needed. We were making plans to stay at Ronald McDonald House. I wasn't leaving that hospital. Of course, in all of this, I was admitted as a patient. I just had a Caesar. Like, I just had been cut open 5 days earlier. I was, you know, being looked after as a patient, and also had my baby. So I was on level 10 of the hospital, and the baby, and Millie was on level 6. So it was just, you know, up and down. And on this Wednesday, we were in the room, and she looked very jaundicey. She was very swollen. She looked very yellow. She had a one-on-one nurse with her the whole time. Like, there was a NICU special care nurse with Millie 24/7. That was how sick she was. And she had somebody looking after her for 12 hours, and then they would hand over to somebody else, and 12 hours. And they were divine earth angel women. Like, these nurses were incredible. And so I remember when this nurse came on the Wednesday, and she said, you know, she was a little bit concerned about the look of Millie and the colour, and I said, yeah, she was a lot better before, like, the colour is definitely getting worse, and she wasn't noticing the yellow. It was more like this, I don't really know what she called it, but like her blood looked patchy into the surface. Millie would come and go between being very swollen and very not, depending on which way we had her head. She had, like, when we were doing what's called cares, where we would, like, you know, wash her little ears or brush her hair, and I would put this paraffin in her creases, and she was like, it wasn't just dry, like, sometimes it was like a rash or like a graze. Like, this poor little girl had just been laying in this spot for so long that her skin was starting to deteriorate in her creases. I think think on the Wednesday I got to hold her for the first time. We couldn't have skin to skin because she was in a nest and had so many cords and stuff on her, but about 6 different nurses had to navigate moving the crib out of the way, lifting up the nest, all of the cords, and then sitting me on a chair, you know, being careful of my wound and everything, and then sat her on them. And oh gosh, the photos of Dylan and I, just, even though it wasn't skin to skin and it wasn't really holding her, it was just like we had so much joy and hope in our faces. And actually that's why we had so much hope on that Wednesday, because they let us hold her. I started giving her colostrum on a little, I had been expressing colostrum for weeks leading up. I just kept saying, like, colostrum is something that you need if your baby is unwell or if you can't feed them, and I just felt like she was going to need that. And so I was able to put the colostrum on a cotton tip and put it in her mouth, and she loved it, she would smile. And so we just had hope. They let me change a nappy that day. And looking back now, we think that they were giving us those things because they knew that she wasn't going to survive. And for a mum, it's so important to have those moments with your child to, you know, breastfeed, feel like you're useful, feel like, you know, what you've done hasn't gone to waste. And I'd been expressing and pumping and trying to get my milk in. So we got to have that hold, and I got to change her nappy and give her some colostrum, and they started actually putting some of my breast milk into her feeding tube. And then this new nurse came in and she just said she was a little bit worried about Millie and she didn't look too well, and I was sitting down there just hanging out, and I kind of felt like the nurse wanted to work on Millie more but was perhaps not stressing because I was there. So I said, I'm going to go up to my room and, you know, I'm probably going to get some sleep. And so I went up to my room and I couldn't sleep. And they have a monitor where you can check on your baby, like a baby monitor. And I kept logging in and it wasn't on, which is sometimes when they're working on the, like if they're just doing changes or whatever, they won't put it on. But I just had this really bad feeling. So I called down to them and they didn't answer. I'm checking the camera and I called down. And then they finally answered at about 10 p.m. and they said, Rochelle, it's the doctor. We're really worried about Millie. We think you need to come down here. And so I said, my husband's asleep, should I wake him up? Dylan had just had 2 sleeping tablets to try to get a good sleep because it had been like 6 days of no sleep at this point. And she said, I think you should. And so I waked Dylan up. I said, we have to go down there. There's something wrong with Millie and they're working on her. And they said, just be aware when you come in, like there's 12 doctors in here and it's very full on. So we're running down the hallway. Dylan's trying to put his shirt on and I'm like yelled out to my midwife. I was like, I've got to go down to Millie. She's not okay. And we go down the stairs and there was like 12 different doctors and specialists and heart, like cardiologists and all these people there just working on our little girl. And that whole day prior, I'd been like getting everyone I knew to pray for Millie to open her eyes. And the doctors were saying, we don't know what happened today, but something's changed and she's gone downhill. And I was so angry at God. I was like, we've been praying all day for her to open her eyes and now she's going downhill. Like, what's the point of praying when this is what happens? Like, and that was the worst night. We just sat there watching them for 4 hours work on our little girl and just not know what's wrong with her. Then a neonatologist took us into a private room, a quiet room, and said, look, you know, we're really worried about Millie and we're not sure what's wrong. We had some exceptional doctors come across from the children's hospital. Like, they were getting out of bed. You could tell people were dragged out of bed to come in and look after her or see what was wrong. And so they found fluid around her heart. And they were all brainstorming these incredibly intelligent, beautiful staff. Like, they were so lovely. And this one doctor, he came in and he was the head cardiologist, I believe, from the children's hospital, and he said, look, Millie is very sick and we're very worried about her. He said there's fluid around her heart, and whilst we don't think that's what's causing this problem, we can't remove it, because if we do operate on Millie, she will bleed out, and so we can't risk hitting her heart and we can't risk her bleeding. So we're not sure how we can help her right now. They said, what's your like, where are you guys at with all of this? What do you think is going on? And we're like, we don't know. If you don't know, then, like, we don't know. But I think at that point they realised that we had hope, but we weren't sure where we were at. And so we truly so they pumped her with adrenaline and they pumped her with morphine and they basically brought her back. And I do believe that they brought her back just so we could have one more day with her. And I think if we had have lost her that night in like such a dramatic, traumatic way, I don't think we would have handled it at all. I definitely would have been angry at God. I definitely would have struggled to see the miracles. But they stabilised her that night and Dylan went back up to bed, and it was about 2:30 in the morning and I was like, I'm not leaving. So I slept on the armchair next to her bed. And in the morning, the nurse woke me up and she said, go up and have a shower and come back down and freshen up. The doctors will be in at 8:30. We've got some more results for Millie and we know more. And I was like, okay, amazing. Like, again, I had hope. So I went up and I had a shower and I said to Dylan, they know what's wrong with Millie. Like, we've got to go back down and have a meeting with them. And we came back down and I remember standing over Millie's crib and the neonatologist came in. Her name was Elizabeth. And at first I was a bit unsure about Elizabeth. She was very matter of fact, very, very intelligent and just, you know, looking after so many babies. There's 68 neo cribs in the Brisbane Mater Hospital. And she came in and she said, she said, Millie caused quite a stir last night, didn't you, Millie? You know, that was so beautiful to Millie and the way that they spoke to her and they loved her. And she said, look, with everything that happened last night and with the fluid around Millie's heart, we actually know, we're very suspicious that we know what's wrong with her. And because of this answer, we now know that so that you can have healthy babies in the future. And I said, but what about Millie? And she just looked at me and she just said, I'm so sorry. And so they took us into a quiet room and had Dylan and I together and just basically said at this point that, you know, they were suspicious that she had what's called CDG PMM2 type 1A. It's basically a super rare genetic disorder, and Millie had the most severe. So she had the brittle bones, she had the low muscle tone, she had the bleeding, she had all of it. She didn't have the seizures, which is something that would have come later if she survived. And then the fluid around the heart was kind of like the final piece of the puzzle. And they basically just guided us through the day of removing her life support, removing her oxygen. They had tried to the day before challenge her oxygen, so turn it down and see if she could breathe on her own. And they were some of the things that caused her to not be okay that night. So they realised that she can't breathe on her own. Oh, fuck. But we had the most beautiful day. The staff were so amazing. It was like, I know they've done it 1,000 times because they just did it with so much grace. They guided us through, you know, just everything. You know, they said, do you want a photographer? And I would just look at my nurse and I would just shrug my shoulders because I didn't know what I needed. I remember I had messaged my sister already that morning saying, I need you here. She flew, she got off the bus to work, went home, got an Uber, got to the airport. You know, Qantas got her a flight up here. And we just called family. Like, we didn't even know what we needed with it. I don't even know what we did, but we just did it. And it was a beautiful day. We got to have skin to skin and yeah, I'm so grateful that we had such amazing staff. We had our obstetrician messaging us like every day, checking in, and he was just so sorry and so apologetic. And I guess I'm probably going to do another episode based around like questions that people probably have and what you know, could we have looked out for things during the pregnancy, or I don't know, but there's so much more. But I just wanted to today share our story of Millie, like just how it happened, because I know so many people would be thinking, how on earth, you know, we just had this perfect pregnancy and then, you know, oh my gosh, sorry, I shouldn't blow my nose in. But our final day with Millie was so stunning, and what I can say is if someone is going to go through this journey, just take so many photos and so many videos and have beautiful music playing and have whoever you can in the room and let them hold your girl. Like, let them just... So I remember that day when I found out the news, I messaged a friend and I said, what was that girl's name from Hope You See Church who lost her baby? Because I remember hearing this girl's story from years earlier. I was actually friends with her on social media, but I'd never spoken to her. And I remember her losing her baby, and I remember not long later she was on stage at church worshipping, or her husband was, and I just remember thinking, how can you worship God when you've just lost your baby? And I remember someone saying that, you know, all the staff in the hospital just thought this couple was so gracious and so beautiful, and I was like, how? But when you're in it, like, you don't know how you're going to be, but we did have grace for this staff because they were so divine, and we did see the miracles, like Millie lasting 6 days, or 7 full days meant we got the answers. And, you know, if she had have passed away at any of those times prior, like in the birth, if we didn't have such incredible team working with us at that point, if she had have died on the Wednesday and we didn't have the specialist bring her back, like, we wouldn't have got the answers that she has CDG, which now means that we can test our future babies to make sure that they don't have it. It means we now have to do IVF, and we have to do that whole process that we didn't think we had to do by having a natural pregnancy, but, you know, that's just the way it goes. But we can now test our embryos and make sure that they don't have CDG, because this is such an awful disease. So I reached out to this Amy, this girl from church, and I just said, I just found out I'm not bringing my baby home. I said, how do I breathe? Like, how do I get through this day? And she just gave me the most beautiful advice. She said, just hold them and smell them and feel the weight of them on you, and just remember those feelings. And I quite often lay in bed and I just pretend that she's on my chest and I just feel the weight. And I use paraffin, the really medical smell of like this weird cream, because it just smells like Millie. I got one of my friend nurses to get me some, and I just smell it, and I put it on Dylan's hair so he could smell it. We just had beautiful worship music playing, and we just spent time with her, and we took photos and videos, and we had a beautiful photographer come. Her name was Elle, and she was from a volunteer company called Heartfelt, and they come and take professional photos of this exact thing. And I thought that would be weird at the time, but it's fucking beautiful. It's like these photos that are behind me are like the most precious things ever, and I just look at them all the time. I so often just lay in bed and look at them, and last night I laid in bed just watching all my videos and just crying. But I think it's so healthy. When we were in the hospital, we had choices of doing things like going to Hummingbird House, where it's a space where you go with your babies that have either deceased or going to be, and, you know, you just have that time. But we chose to spend all of our time in the Mater because we just wanted to keep it all there. Like, we could have come home, we could have done all these things, but we just thought Millie had fought for so long already. She'd been moved around, she had tubes everywhere, and we were just like, it's actually unfair of us to put her through anymore just for us. And so we asked if we could just go up to my hospital room, and so they brought a bed down and they allowed 2 adults on the bed, which is not normal, and Dylan and myself got on the bed, and we had Millie on my chest, and I just had, you know, just the cape on, and I just had beautiful skin to skin, and they made sure they could take everything up to the room so that she could continue breathing with the oxygen. And then when we were guided to, when we were ready, we had the time and we allowed them to remove the oxygen. And at that point, we didn't know whether Millie would take one breath or whether she'd breathe on for a few days, but she took a couple of breaths on her own, and then she passed away on my chest, which is so fucking special. Like, it's so heartbreaking, but I fucking cherish that so much. Like, a lot of people don't get that opportunity. Like, babies die in other ways sometimes, and I do feel blessed that I got to have that experience with her. And Dylan was on the bed with me, and the photographer was there, and the midwife, and then we bathed her, and then we dressed her, took her little handprints and footprints, and then we chose to leave. And that was so fucking hard. To say bye to your baby and leave them at a hospital is fucking awful. And I'll just share this one last bit before I finish up, but
we had the choice to see her again at the funeral home a few days later, and when we left Millie in the hospital, when they took her tubes out, the thing I wasn't expecting, I don't know what I was expecting, but I just hadn't thought of it, and they took the tubes out and very quickly her colour changed. She went back to that kind of jaundicey colour and very bruised and very swollen, and her little mouth was open, and it was really awful. And we almost left a couple of times, and then I said to Dylan, I was like, no, we have to do this, and I just kept like speaking beauty over her. I was like, baby, you're so beautiful, because I just didn't want her to go to heaven thinking that she wasn't. And that's when we bathed her and dressed her and stuff, and I just kept speaking beauty into her. Like, she was such a beautiful little girl, but that last vision of her looking like that was really hard. And like, when we came home, I went into shock and I was shaking, and I'm going, Dylan, just hold me and just hug me, and we went to sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, that was a vision I had of her. And so my friend's mum was running the funeral for us, and she was able to organise us to go and see Millie, and I just kept saying to her, please make sure she looks okay, because I can't have like another vision of that. And Tracy said, I just don't know how they would think this baby's not beautiful, like she's just stunning. So when we went to see her, she was so beautiful, like she was fully healed. Like when they say you die and go to heaven and you're healed, like I can fully, I created that. Like my baby just looked like a normal, beautiful little baby, no broken bones. Tracy said when she dressed her, she said, I would never have known she had broken bones if you didn't tell me, because this baby is fine, you know, like, so she was cold obviously, but she was dressed in her little outfit that we dressed her in. She had her little bear, and the hospital gave me one of these bears as well, so I swapped it so that this one is hers. It's even got a little hospital sticker still, and I carry it everywhere. I just realised it has a little hole in it already. But seeing her in the funeral home was really healing for us, and it was really hard. We had to walk away from our baby again, and even Dylan was like, I don't want to leave her, she just looks like she's asleep on the couch with us, like. And then we had her funeral a few days later, and we had a pink funeral, and it was just beautiful and big and bright and vibrant, and over 400 people joined in online from 9 different countries. She was a loved little girl. And we had over 130 people in the room. We had so many family and friends fly in from all over the country, and we're so grateful for that. And then we had to walk away from her again, and we had to carry her little coffin in, and then it's just awful. It's not something I ever thought I would have to fucking experience. And again, I can't believe I'm starting a podcast about baby loss, you know, after everything we'd already been through to get pregnant. But here we are. So, you know, I feel like this podcast is now going to be a safe space for other people to share their story, to cry, to grieve, to, you know, I feel so honoured and grateful for anyone that is willing to share their story, because it's such a sacred thing to share, and I've always been an oversharer, but I know that's not, you know, how everyone is, and I just feel like this is super healing. I just said to Dylan, I'm going into a podcast, I don't even know what I'm going to say, but I just knew that I didn't want it scripted, or I just wanted to be able to share, and I feel really good that I've been able to share this, so thank you to anyone who listens. And thank you for loving Millie, and thank you for sharing her name with me. I get messages all the time from people saying, you know, I just saw the pinkest sunset and I thought of Millie, or I just saw, you know, and I'm getting so many beautiful signs. Even this guy, he just sleeps on my chest, his name's Miley, and I just quite often pretend it's really going on. You're the best. So that's the story of Millie, Rose, Remidy, Evrard, the most beautiful little girl in the world. Thank you for listening. I'll definitely be sharing more. There's so much more to our story in terms of, you know, what was next, how was my postpartum, how was my healing. I've got loads of questions that I'm going to be asking other lost parents if people want to share, and I just hope that this is a space, one, you know, most importantly for people to share their story and feel heard and feel seen, and I'm going to be asking questions about what helped you, you know, after, what didn't help, what was practical, what was not, and then you know, I guess people might listen to the podcast that are wanting to help a friend who's grieving and they don't know how to help, because people kept saying to us, how can we help you? And I said, I don't even know what we need. So this is going to be the space for that. So again, thank you for listening. Pray for us, pray for our future, pray for our babies, and sending all my love, and thank you for your support, and thank you for your love.